She raised her hand and spoke the truth. What came next? An expulsion, a silence forced on her, a teacher's word taken as law, and a school that thought she'd just walk away. But they didn't know who her father was, and they didn't know how far he was willing to go for justice. This is the story of a girl who stood up and made an entire system answer for its silence. The final bell rang through the halls of Ridgewood High. Some students laughed, some ran to their lockers, but Jasmine Carter, she walked slowly, her heart heavy, her thoughts louder than the noise around her. Something was coming, she could feel it, and deep down, she knew it had been building for weeks. It all started small, questions ignored, essays marked down for reasons that didn't make sense, comments from her teacher, Ms. Whitmore, that weren't exactly cruel, but always had an edge, a coldness, like she didn't quite belong. At first, Jasmine brushed it off. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe Miss Whitmore was just strict, tough on everyone. But that excuse didn't hold up for long. And then came that history class. The moment everything changed. Ms. Whitmore stood at the front of the room lecturing confidently. By the 1970s, she said, equal opportunities were available to everyone. The civil rights movement did its job. Everyone had a fair shot. Jasmine's hand rose before she could even stop herself. That's not completely true, she said. There were still huge disparities. In schools, housing, even the justice system. The class went silent. All eyes turned. Miss Whitmore gave a tight smile. Jasmine, we're not here to argue. But those are facts, Jasmine said calmly. They're well documented. Silence stretched across the room. Tense, uncomfortable. Miss Whitmore's voice sharpened. You're disrupting the class. I'm just... Enough, she snapped. Go to the office. Jasmine blinked. Wait, what? Now. The chair scraped loudly as Jasmine stood. Her classmates stared. Not one of them said a word. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't insulted anyone. All she did was speak the truth. And now, she was being sent away. The hallway outside felt different, colder, quieter. When she reached the front office, the secretary didn't even look up. Have a seat, she muttered. Jasmine sat, arms folded, legs shaking, her thoughts spiraling. Minutes passed. Then 30. Finally, the door opened. Jasmine, said Principal Eldridge. He looked uninterested, tired, like this was just another item on his to-do list. She walked in, and there, already seated, was Ms. Whitmore. Jasmine's stomach dropped. She's been disruptive in class, Miss Whitmore began, arguing, interrupting, making it hard to teach. That's not true, Jasmine said quickly. Principal Eldridge raised a hand. Let her finish. She's shown a pattern, Ms. Whitmore continued. She constantly challenges authority. It creates tension for the other students. Eldridge finally looked at Jasmine. Is this true? No, she said, swallowing hard. I corrected something she said. I didn't raise my voice. I just disagreed. She was argumentative, Ms. Whitmore cut in. I wasn't. That's enough, Eldridge said. We take classroom disruptions seriously, and, as a private institution, we have a zero-tolerance policy. He shuffled papers. Effective immediately. You're expelled. Jasmine froze. What? You may collect your things. Your parents will be informed. She stood up slowly. Number stunned. She'd done everything right, stayed respectful, told the truth. And now, she was being punished, not for misbehaving, but for speaking. As she walked out, the hallway felt even colder. The noise around her faded into static. The walls felt taller, the lights too bright. She hadn't just been sent out of class, she'd been silenced. But the school had no idea what was coming next. The ride home was silent. Jasmine sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window. The streets of Wellington passed in a blur, but she didn't see any of it. Her mother, Nicole Carter, kept glancing at her, worried, confused. "What happened, baby?" she asked softly. Jasmine didn't answer. She couldn't. The words felt stuck in her throat. When they pulled into the driveway, she finally spoke. "They expelled me." Nicole slammed the brakes. "What?" Jasmine's voice was low, flat. "Miss Whitmore said I was being disruptive because I corrected her in class." Nicole turned toward her. "What did you say?" "I told her that what she said about civil rights wasn't accurate, that there were still problems long after the 1970s." Nicole's face darkened. "And they expelled you for that?" Jasmine nodded. That was all she could do. As soon as they stepped inside, Jasmine dropped her bag, and the weight of the day finally crushed her. The tears came fast, heavy, unstoppable. She wasn't the kind of girl who cried easily, but this was different. She had followed the rules, been respectful, told the truth, and for that, they kicked her out. Every moment she'd been ignored. Every time she was graded unfairly. Every look that made her feel like she didn't belong. It all hit her at once. She collapsed onto the couch, hands covering her face, sobs shaking her chest. She didn't hear the footsteps, but when she looked up, he was there. Her father, Malcolm Carter. He stood in the doorway of his home office, calm, still, watching her with eyes that didn't miss a thing. He didn't speak right away. Nicole walked over to him and rested a hand on his arm. "She's in shock," she said quietly. Malcolm took a long breath, then looked at Jasmine. "Tell me everything," he said. Jasmine sat up, wiped her eyes, tried to steady her voice, and then she told him. She walked him through it all. What happened in class, what Miss Whitmore said, how the principal never gave her a real chance to explain, how it felt like a decision had already been made, before she even opened her mouth. Malcolm didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions. He just listened. His expression never changed, but Jasmine could feel the tension building in the room. When she finished, the silence was thick. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers once, twice against the table. "So, you corrected your teacher, respectfully?" Jasmine nodded. "Yeah, and for that, you were labeled a problem." "Pretty much," she whispered. Malcolm stood. "Okay." Jasmine looked up. "That's it?" Nicole smiled softly. "Sweetheart, if your dad says okay like that, things are about to happen." The next morning, Ridgewood High was buzzing. Students filed into the building, laughing, talking, just another normal school day, until a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Sleek, slow, deliberate. Inside the school, Principal Eldridge was settling into his chair, sipping coffee, flipping through paperwork, when the intercom crackled. Sir, there's someone here to see you." "I don't have any appointments," he muttered. "It's Malcolm Carter." Eldridge froze. The name hit him like a punch. Carter and Owens, one of the most respected civil rights law firms in the entire state. He had read about Malcolm Carter. He'd seen him on the news. He knew the reputation. And now, the man was standing in his office. "Send him in," he said quickly. The door opened, and Malcolm walked in, like he owned the room. Tall, sharp, wearing a charcoal suit and a look that said, "I'm not here to talk, I'm here to change things." He didn't wait for pleasantries. He walked to the desk, dropped a thick folder on it, and looked the principal right in the eye. "Let's talk about my daughter." Principal Eldridge stared at the folder. Thick, heavy, full of something he already knew he didn't want to see. "I understand you're upset," he began, trying to sound calm. Malcolm Carter didn't blink. "No," he said. "I was upset yesterday. Today, I'm here for accountability." Eldridge shifted in his seat. "Look, the decision was based on school policy." Malcolm raised a hand. And just like that, the room fell silent. "You expelled my daughter, without warning, without investigation, without asking her what happened. You took the word of a teacher who's shown a pattern of targeting students who look like Jasmine. That's a very serious accusation," Eldridge said, his voice tighter now. Malcolm leaned forward. "It is, and I have the documentation to back it up." He tapped the folder once, then pushed it toward the principal. Inside were pages of testimony, emails, statements from other parents, former students, even other teachers who had noticed things, but stayed quiet. Eldridge opened it, scanned the first page. His face began to pale. "This isn't just about my daughter," Malcolm said quietly. "It's about a system, and you let it happen." Outside the office window, Ms. Whitmore passed by. She saw him, stopped, and froze. She had never met Jasmine's father, not once, not in meetings, not at events. But in that instant, she knew exactly who he was. Inside the room, Eldridge tried to regroup. "Mr. Carter, please understand, this isn't personal." "Oh," Malcolm said with a slow smile. "It's very personal now." He continued, "I've already contacted the school board, and 3 reporters who are interested in this story. They want to know why a private school expels a student for correcting a history lesson." Eldridge's hands fidgeted on the desk. Then the door creaked open. Miss Whitmore stepped in, her shoulders stiff, face tight. She knew she couldn't hide. Malcolm turned to her. "Good. You're here." She sat down slowly, eyes flicking nervously between the 2 men. "You've been targeting my daughter," Malcolm said. "You ignored her in class, graded her unfairly, silenced her when she shared facts." "She was argumentative," Miss Whitmore muttered. "She was right," Malcolm replied sharply, "and you didn't like it." "I treat all my students equally," she said, barely above a whisper. Malcolm slid another sheet of paper across the desk. "This is a list of former students, all students of color, all with similar complaints." Miss Whitmore didn't speak. "I also have letters from parents, some afraid to come forward, but not anymore." Eldridge cleared his throat. "What exactly are you asking for?" Malcolm stood up, calm, composed, in control. "My daughter returns to school immediately, with a formal apology." He paused. "And this goes to the school board. Full transparency." Eldridge hesitated. "That's a lot to ask." Malcolm looked him dead in the eye. "I'm not asking." And with that, he turned and walked out. Miss Whitmore sat frozen, pale, still, because for the first time she realized this wasn't going away. The door shut behind Malcolm Carter, and silence filled the office. Principal Eldridge stared down at the folder, as if it might explode. Miss Whitmore sat still, back straight, jaw clenched, but her hands were trembling. Eldridge looked up slowly. "Karen, what were you thinking?" "I followed school policy," she said quickly. "Don't lie to me," he snapped. "You and I both know Jasmine didn't deserve that expulsion. She was disruptive," Miss Whitmore muttered. Eldridge leaned back, laughing bitterly. "Or maybe she just made you uncomfortable, because she knew what she was talking about." Ms. Whitmore looked away. "This is being blown out of proportion." Eldridge's voice dropped. "No, it's not. You saw what Carter had in that folder. He's coming after all of us now. Not just you." Ms. Whitmore swallowed hard. "So, what happens next?" Eldridge pinched the bridge of his nose. "You're going to apologize." Her eyes snapped up. "Absolutely not." "Then pack your desk," he said flatly. She froze. "What?" He didn't blink. "You've been here a long time. But if this goes public, the district won't protect you. The board won't protect you. And I won't risk my job trying to clean up your mess." Ms. Whitmore's jaw clenched. "Fine, I'll apologize." "Good," he said. "Jasmine's coming back. Today." But before he could reach for the phone, the office door opened. Nicole Carter walked in first, graceful, composed, her eyes locked onto Eldridge like she was measuring him. Jasmine followed behind her, head high, back straight, not the same girl who had walked out 2 days ago. Ms. Whitmore felt her stomach twist. Eldridge stood quickly. "Mrs. Carter, Jasmine, please, have a seat." "We'll stand," Nicole said firmly. Eldridge nodded, nervous. "After reviewing the situation, we've decided to reinstate Jasmine. She'll return to class immediately." Jasmine said nothing. "And—" he hesitated. "Ms. Whitmore has something to say." All eyes turned. Ms. Whitmore's mouth went dry. She looked at Jasmine and forced the words out. "I apologize for how I handled the situation." Jasmine tilted her head. "That's not an apology." Nicole folded her arms. "We're waiting." Ms. Whitmore took a shaky breath. "I apologize for expelling you unfairly, and for the way I treated you." Silence. Then Jasmine gave a small nod. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I hope you mean it." Eldridge tried to smile. "Well, I'm glad we were able to reach an understanding." But Jasmine didn't smile back. Because she knew the truth. They weren't doing this out of kindness. They were doing it because they had no choice. As Jasmine turned to leave, Ms. Whitmore called out behind her. "Jasmine!" She stopped, looked over her shoulder. "This was never personal," Ms. Whitmore said softly. Jasmine's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You just didn't think I'd fight back." And then she walked out, leaving Ms. Whitmore to sit in the silence and face what she had done. The next morning, Jasmine walked through the front doors of Ridgewood High, head held high, eyes steady, each step louder than it used to be. The same students filled the halls, the same lockers, the same teachers. But everything felt different. This time, people noticed her. Some glanced at her, quickly looking away. Others whispered as she passed. A few nodded, quiet, respectful. Jasmine didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She had returned, and everyone knew. She hadn't come back the same. She made her way to her locker, spun the dial, took a deep breath. That's when she heard it. "Jasmine!" She turned. It was Leah Thompson, one of the only other black girls in her grade. They had never really talked before. But now, Leah looked nervous, hopeful. "I just wanted to say," she began, "what you did. That was really brave." Jasmine gave her a soft smile. "Thanks." Leah hesitated, then said quietly, "Last year, Ms. Whitmore did the same thing to me, marked me down, ignored me in class. I didn't think anyone would believe me, so I stayed quiet." Jasmine felt a tightness in her chest. She had felt it wasn't just her, but hearing it out loud confirmed it. "You're not alone," she said. Leah smiled faintly. "You made that true." Then the loudspeaker crackled above them, and Principal Eldridge's voice filled the halls. "Good morning, students. I want to take a moment to address a recent situation involving one of our own." The hallway fell quiet. Every head turned toward the speakers. "As of today, Jasmine Carter has been fully reinstated. We recognize that mistakes were made, and we are reviewing our disciplinary policies to ensure fairness for all students." A pause. "If you feel you've been treated unfairly, we want to hear from you. Our doors are open." The speaker clicked off. And just like that, the air changed. Students stared, not with judgment but with respect, curiosity, even admiration. Leah turned back to Jasmine. "That's because of you." Jasmine looked down the hallway. She hadn't just gotten her seat back. She had made the school acknowledge her, publicly. And now, the silence wasn't hers to carry anymore. She turned to Leah. "Maybe it's time more of us started talking." That afternoon, Jasmine sat at the dining table. Her phone buzzed beside her. She scrolled through news posts, blog articles, and comments. The story had spread, not just around school, but online. Local news outlets had picked it up. A civil rights blog wrote about it. Parents were sharing it on social media. Some were outraged, others inspired. Everyone was talking. Across the table, her father watched her. "Well?" he asked. Jasmine looked up. "I feel like I actually made something happen." Malcolm nodded slowly. "You did." She hesitated. "Do you think this'll really change anything?" Malcolm leaned back. "Not overnight. But change doesn't start with crowds. It starts with one person who doesn't back down." Her phone buzzed again. A new message. It was from Leah. "Hey, we're thinking of starting a student group, a space where people can talk about this stuff. About unfair treatment, school rules, teachers. You in?" Jasmine stared at the message for a moment, then smiled. "Absolutely." From the doorway, her father spoke. "You know," Jasmine looked over, "I have a feeling this isn't the last time you'll be standing up for something." She smirked. "Probably not." Malcolm walked over and sat beside her on the back porch. The sky was painted in soft oranges and deep blues. The air was calm, but inside her, a fire was burning. He nudged her gently. "The world needs more people who speak up when it counts." Jasmine nodded slowly, letting those words sink in. She thought back to everything, the moment she raised her hand. The silence, the expulsion, the humiliation, the fight, and the return. She had almost stayed quiet, almost let them tell her she was wrong for speaking the truth. But she didn't. She fought back. And in doing so, she didn't just find her voice. She proved that it mattered, that one student can stand up to a system, that silence isn't safety, it's surrender. And now, she wasn't going back to silence. Not ever again. What happened to Jasmine isn't just fiction, it's reality for too many students. Students who are told to sit down, be quiet, don't make waves. But change doesn't happen when we stay silent. It happens when we speak, loud, clear, and unafraid. So if this story meant something to you, don't let it end here. Speak up, stand tall, and never, ever let them silence you.